So, hello everybody. This is the Secret of Light group, and we are now on Chapter 10, The Function of the Brain. I'd like to welcome you all. Thank you so much for attending. It's always a joy to have others partake of this journey. So, let's get started. We're going to talk about the brain and its functions. And during this discussion we're going to have today, we're going to really explore the brain itself, different concepts of the brain, and where does thought resonate, and where does our soul and our actual conscience resonate and reside, and how we may be able to communicate, and how we get communication from humans and also from the divine. So with that being said, let us start with the first question from The Secret of Light from page 56. The question is, how does Walter Russell describe the brain's activity? And from page 56, the brain is a complex state of motion expressed by waves of light pulsing in cycles. So I think I have one diagram of that. And we have this charging and discharging of the, if you can see this, the light is coming in, charging, discharging, and so on. And it is putting these, just as a current has a pulse, right? I mean, when you have a certain electrical system, you would have a pulse that comes in, and that pulse would then resonate, and it would be, an alternating current, on and off, on and off. So here's another picture here of the brain, this mind and emotion universe, where we've talked a little bit about how it resonates with music and with the periodic table and with the colors. So what does that mean to you in terms of this pulsating waves of light pulsating in cycles? Does that have strike any chords with either of you?
Well, I was thinking of, remember at the beginning when we had that wheel where it disappears? So I'm thinking because it's pulsing, it would appear and disappear. And then the lights, I was thinking of like a computer, like in the brain, like, because it's, well, it says waves in cycle here and motion.
Yeah. And
I mean, it would, brain activity, they kind of measure that, like it goes in, well, in different places, depending what you're using. Huh?
But this also says it's by waves of light.
Okay.
Pulsing in cycles. So, as you guys know, on the channel, I actually showed the phases of the moon.
Oh, yeah.
Because, right, that we have these different phases of light that the moon goes through in a cycle, returning back to zero, right? We have the new moon, we go all the way to the full moon, and then we go back into a cycle back to the new moon. And to me, I see that a lot as to how we perceive and the brain perceives, is that we have this cycle that flows through of light that's pulsing in cycles. And it's not only, and so it's, as I think you were talking earlier, Tamara, about the drawing that you have of the wave and how that is a pulsing wave that flows through. And through that, the brain is in this complex state of motion expressed by these waves of light. Now, if these waves of light, the thing that's that may be a bit different here is, are the waves coming through and actually creating thought, or are they actually, the waves of light are being expressed by the brain, right? That the motion that we see is being expressed by the waves of light. So this is really the brain's activity. So what is going on inside the brain? So we're having these waves of light pulsing in cycles in our brain. So this pulsing is created probably a vibration, right? Because that's when you have a pulse, you'll have a vibration. So we're getting some vibratory action. And we're also, through this, the brain is responding.
So and I think I don't know if it was chapter, is it 10 or 11, where he talks about the movie projector.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it makes me think of like what's happening in the machine of the
Mhm.
movie projector.
Mhm.
Like, I wonder if
It's almost as if, like you said, our eyes and we are the projector.
right. That's what
As the film flows through us, as these light waves flow through us, we are projecting the images.
so we're like the image and the projector.
Well,
Or well, go ahead, sorry.
we project our reality.
Right.
See, it's very difficult for us to ever say if what, as you look at this screen, whether or not you're actually seeing the same screen I'm seeing. That, because if I was to draw it, you may pick up the same resonances that you see, but they're not really what I drew, because that's the way you're processing it. And because we talked earlier, each person's a bit different. Each person's unique. No one's going to see everything the same way. So as we project, we actually project our own reality, our own vision. And it's very difficult to say that anyone else sees that same vision, because whatever they see, even if you and I watch the same movie, what we project into what's being given may be different.
Yeah. This might be a little bit off topic, but it kind of reminds me a little bit like when I first started learning about homeopathy, like, everybody's different. So, nobody experiences the same, we might have share certain symptoms when we're sick with something, but because we're different, we're individuals, we don't necessarily need the same, like, I once took a picture of my daughter walking down the road, our dirt road, and the dog was kind of pulling her, and I was on the family, message chat, and I shared it because it was a cute picture. And there was, I think, 5 of us on there, and each person, one was like, "Oh, Summer, what a life." One person's like, "Oh, it looks like she's dancing." Everyone interpreted the picture totally different. So it reminded me of Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, and the dog was Toto, and one person didn't even respond. Like, so it's just, yeah, I'm going off topic, aren't I?
No. You're actually totally on topic of what I'm saying, is that we are under the belief that all people see the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's what's taught, and that's what is taught in school, and that's what's taught in science. And what we find is that maybe not everybody does see the same thing, because, as I talked about a little bit, I was talking about Swedenborg, and I don't know if you guys even know Swedenborg, who he was, but he started out being a mining engineer, and then he actually did some inventions, and then he actually interpreted the Bible with a new interpretation, which is, even though he was a Christian, was totally different than what Christians preach today, or even preach then. But one of his statements was, the truth is that the life of everyone, both of man, of spirit, and also of angel, flows in solely from the Lord, which Russell would call the source, who is life itself, and diffuses itself through whole heaven and also through hell, thus into everyone. And this is an order and a series incomprehensible. But the life which flows in is received by each one according to his disposition. So what we're talking about there is that we all may be receiving the same information, but our unique makeup, our unique coding, our unique structures, our unique overlays, our traumas may actually produce a different video or picture or cinema than somebody else, even though we believe it to be the same.
Like in Doctor Who, I don't know if you watch Doctor Who.
I watch Doctor Who, yes.
Okay, so, they travel in time, and then they'll go to a place like, okay, let's say they go, then it's, I don't know, the war with the Scottish or whatever, they're in the woods. But you see, then they go into a hut and, there's a screen there. But only Doctor Who and the visitors can see it because they have no cognitions in their head of what that is. Like they just can't even phantom it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, and I've spoke about this, I think, in the past on some other times we talked, but this was something that happened with the indigenous people of South America when the conquistadors came, and they came in these huge ships, and the native people could not see the ships.
See?
Only the shamans could, because the shamans had a greater awareness of what could be. But the psyche, so they say, the psyche of the native people could not even comprehend it, so they could not even see it.
Well, that goes back a little bit to what you were talking about before about the person. I think, did you say it was a friend who, when he talks to someone, he talks like,
3 feet above.
3 feet above. Yeah. In a way, maybe that's like he's seeing something that other people, I mean, do you think that's the same or similar?
Well, I think that based on some, our development, we see different possibilities. The fewer the possibilities, if and they say that, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail.
Okay.
Because
that's good. That's a good analogy. If I'm a hammer, all I can see is a nail.
Exactly.
Okay.
I want to be a pliers too.
I want to be a hammer. What is the song?
If I had a hammer.
I had a hammer. Oh yeah, I would hammer all day. Okay.
So the more that we confine our thought, confine our thinking, the less we see. And we talk about that. I was watching something today where, that we have blinders. I mean, even Jesus talked about this, right? He who has eyes and cannot see. There are things all around us that if we get into a state, if we get into a mindset, if we don't allow ourselves to be open and of possibilities, then we may not see what's before us. And so as these waves move through our brain, and that's why I want to talk a bit about the brain a little bit today, because as we talk about the brain, we can actually see that the physical makeup of the brain and the healthiness of the brain will have a lot to do with what we see and perceive. So let's look a little bit at the brain now, because we've talked about it, and it's a complex of these waves. And this is what Russell's saying, that there's these light waves coming through. And as we look at the brain here, and these are just different views. So we got a side view here, we got a top view. This is with the brain being cut, and this is what I would call the cave that Giselle was speaking about earlier.
Is there a way to move so I'm part of.
You can move it around.
Okay, thank you. So what do I just oh, I got it. Okay.
Use the banner, just use your mouse. And
that's what I got. I got it now.
I moved it on the left-hand nav right now because
that's what I'm doing. Now I can see
you're showing the slide, but so the slide may not be as big as you're showing it to us. You know that, eh? Because
no, it's on here it's on my whole screen, but we were small. I just was able to move us over. So.
Yeah, that's what I do. I keep moving it around depending what the diagram is.
Okay, I got it.
So this is like if you were to take the brain and slice it in half.
Okay.
So this is showing us here that in the center, right, this is the thalamus, which kind of forms this cave that you were talking about. And off of this thalamus is the hypothalamus, and is the pineal gland, which is right here. This little gland right here. Can you see that right here above the 14? This arrow points to it right here. Mm-hmm. So, and there's been a
that's so funny.
The similarities. Now this is reversed from what this looks like. So just to let you know.
It's so funny. I have a little one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you do?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a present years and years ago. So anyway, I'm excited to see this.
So there's similarities between the cross section of the brain showing the pineal gland and the eye of Ra.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see the eye here, so this right here would be this portion coming off here on this side, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the hypothalamus, which is over here. So this is the pineal gland actually right here. This is the hypothalamus over here, and this dot right here is actually the eye.
Because it's reversed, eh?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what I'm saying. Yeah.
And then the eyebrow here is actually this portion here.
What did you say the dot was?
The dot is the thalamus, which is his eye.
Thalamus.
Oh, okay.
And this is the hypothalamus here, which is this kind of area here. And then this would be the pineal over here. So there's, a lot of esoteric meaning to the eye of Ra and to the cross section of the brain. Now, as we talk about this, Russell's saying that there's these light waves that flow through, causing vibration, causing vibratory motion. Now, when you look at over here, and this is really just, like an anatomy of what is thought of today within allopathy, within physical science of the brain itself. There's nothing esoteric about any of what I'm showing here. I added this myself, and I added all this over here. These portions were not in this diagram. So when you look at this, you see the visual areas, 1 back here. You have short-term memory, which is 2, which is here, and emotion. You have motor function, 3. You have muscles and speech, which is 4, which is over here. Auditory areas, 5, and so on and so forth. And as you go down, you'll see sensory areas, a 9, which is on top. So, and then the higher mental functions, which is when you get a lobotomy, is what they take out of you, is, painting, conception, judgment, creativity, and inhibitions here in the front of the brain. So we have this entire brain where, the reason how they find out what these are is they actually, add stimulus, and then they'll see where these areas may light up due to electrical responses.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with all that being said, we have the olfactory area, which is, the smelling, which is number 8, which is where's number 8? Somewhere here. Can't even find 8.
It's right
Here
on
it
the
is.
curve.
Right here. It's right here. Yeah, right there. Very small, but it's very close to the pituitary gland. Very close. So most of this brain is blocked out for sensory perception, right? For seeing, for all these different things. The only area of the brain that's really not is within this 13, which is the judgment, the emotional expression, So within the front part of the brain here, this is where we really get, the differentiation between just sensory response. But what I believe Russell's saying is that we perceive that area there, this judgment, to be thinking, to be what we would consider intelligence. But what Russell's saying is that this area is really just processing this sensory data from the other portions of the brain and making determination, and it's not true thinking. So it's really just computing the sensory perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
And like it's saying, so you walk over to a stove and it's hot, so your hand's hot and your eyes see fire. So now you have this memory, now you have this thought, now you have this belief that when I see a hot stove, I don't touch it, otherwise I'll get burned. And he's saying people believe that to be thinking and to be intelligence, and it's really just more of a conditioned response. There's no real intelligence to that. But that's what we believe. And that is an electrical process in the brain.
It's a recording machine as well, right?
It's a recording machine. That's where we record. And that's where, like, sometimes you see here the short-term memory, the temporal lobe. And so they were recording, and that's what he says, they're electric recordings. And we take these electric recordings and we believe that to be thinking and thought and intelligence. And he's saying, no, that is just what your body is sensing, feeling, and touching. And there is a higher form of intelligence. There's a higher form of thinking, which comes from God, comes from source, comes from outside your body, basically, which is a resonance and a light wave in which this is coming into this functioning plasma, bioplasmic computer, basically, machine, as he calls it. And those are being recorded to aid us in our life here on Earth, in the physical existence. But what he's saying is that's not our true purpose. Our true purpose is not to be encompassed in this. Now, we're being taught in school, we're being taught in other places that, yes, this is our world. We
Yeah, like
reside
learning
here.
by rote and knowing all these useless facts are more important than actually, well, really learning how to think. But anyway.
Yeah. And we've had discussion prior to recording the meeting about some of these things that I'm talking about. So I'm saying as we were speaking, and I was, how synchronicities work, right? That we're going to talk about all these things.
Mhm.
And so we've been conditioned that this brain is us. And Walter Russell says, no, this brain is not us. This brain really is, it functions for us. It keeps us safe. It helps us, know when it's cold, know when to run from a lion, know when to do these things. But that is not our purpose. And the brain's just put here to help us with those things to keep us alive, pretty much. But it's not really the idea for thought. It's not really those things, because we do know these things. We do know that I don't know if many people teach you that you have to run from a lion when you first see it. If they didn't teach that, there'd be no humans left. They'd all be eaten. So there are things that are innate that we know. So within our brains here, we have that. And then we have, like I said, the thymus, the eye of Ra. And when you look at this brain, it almost looks like we were talking about a toroidal field, with coming out like this and like this, right? And we'll get into a little bit more of that in some of the other diagrams that we see. But we also have what we call the pineal gland, which is right here. And for the pineal gland, the pineal gland is a small pea-shaped gland that is located in the center of the brain behind and above the pituitary gland. It weighs less than 2 grams. Unlike much of the rest of the brain, this gland is not isolated. This is not isolated from the body by the blood-brain barrier. René Descartes believed the human pineal gland to be the principal seat of the soul. Now, do you guys, are you familiar with Descartes' work, or what Descartes is known for? Okay, so what Descartes was, he's the one who actually started the idea of specialization and compartmentalization. So he's the one that kind of drilled down, we're going to, get into each of these areas, separate them out a little bit. At least that's what they say he's known for. So it's very strange that he actually was saying that the pineal gland was the seat of the soul. And also, there's quite a bit of esoteric. So the pineal gland produces melatonin. If you read Steiner and you talk to indigenous people, we know that when melatonin and serotonin-derived hormone that modulates sleep patterns. When did indigenous people and mystics actually talk to the spirit realm? When they were asleep.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Right? And this is the gland that actually controls that. And we know that when this is not functioning properly, we don't sleep well and we don't dream.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't dream, we have a hard time actually communicating with the spirit world. Because as I said in the previous video also, that in past times, a lot of people believed that the dream world was the real world and that the physical world was the dream. So as this pineal gland gets interrupted, we begin to lose function with sleep, which then affects our dream life, which then can also affect our spiritual life. So your circadian rhythm is a 24-hour biological cycle, which is characterized by sleep-wake patterns, as you know. In addition, the pineal gland plays an important role in the regulation of female hormone levels, and it may affect the menstrual cycle and fertility. Now, as you know, I also shared cycles of the moon, which is a 28-day cycle, which is also the cycle of a woman's menstrual. And when just a little bit of research I do, and I've never had a menstrual cycle myself, but I've been reading that women, once they actually begin to recognize the moon more and include it in the phases in their life, that their periods will actually sync up with the moon, with the phases and so on and so forth. So we know that there's a lot going on with this pineal gland in our brain. So it's a different, it's a different structure than the rest of our brain. The rest of our brain, I think, is what Russell talks about. We have these light waves going through, they're forming these things, we're projecting, we're having our sensations that run our bodies, that actually create our physical realities, but that's not thinking. That's not knowing, right? And so in 1985, there was a study conducted which with impaired pineal glands established that damage to the pineal gland is linked with declines in the sense of direction. This suggests that this gland may play an important unrecognized role in spatial navigation or dimensional navigation. According to theosophy, the pineal gland is an important psychophysiological center and the source of intuition and clairvoyance.
Mm-hmm.
So when Russell talks a lot, he talks about knowing, and he talks about communing with the divine. So again, Russell's not pointing to the brain. He's not saying here's the brain and here's where this is happening, but I'm kind of pointing to it and saying, yeah, this is where this is happening. This knowing, this communing, this is happening within the pineal gland. The rest of the brain is electrical impulses, and we believe that to be us, when it's really the receptor, the antenna, and the pineal gland is the one that resonates the most. So as we talk a little bit more, as a chakra, the pineal gland represents the point in which the body receives energy from the universe, which keeps our lives sustained. And that's another point that Russell made, was that our body is not us, it is not life. That life is the spirit. Once the spirit is removed, the body is dead. And again, what I'm trying to get into here is we're talking about the brain. We're talking about thinking. We're talking about knowing. So let's kind of get to look at the brain and see how it functions, and maybe why we think in different ways or see in different ways. So many believe the abilities of this gland offers come from its capacity to naturally produce its own DMT when fully operational. And you guys know what DMT is, right? This is plant medicine. This is what some people take to actually enter the spirit world, to see different things. Well, the pineal gland can produce that on its own when it's functioning properly. Calcification. The pineal gland often appears calcified in X-rays, which is typically due to fluoride, phosphorus, and calcium deposits, which build up with age. Furthermore, the pineal gland is suppressed by electromagnetic fields released by mobile phones and other wireless devices.
Well, you really did your research there. Well, I'm just saying, it's not something you're going to see written in just anywhere. That particular line, there's a lot in there. Sorry.
Yes. And as we see today, what's happening when we have fluoride in our water, right? We have lots of waves. We have actually, current systems that may or may not be aiding in the calcification and the degeneration of the pineal gland. So, the pineal gland, as we look at it, it really is almost as if it was an antenna that is picking up vibrations, which then may run through the rest of the brain as electrical current of these waves of light that we're talking about.
So if it's calcified, the signal's not being able it's not getting the signal, right?
Correct. Well, it could be getting the signal, but I know that I was getting a calcified pineal and I took some DMSO orally,
Hmm.
which helps with decalcification of the pineal. And for about the next 15 minutes, I was seeing like a stop frame motion
Wow.
until it cleared up. And it took about, I don't know, maybe about 30 minutes for it to clear up. But after that, I became much more aware. So there's, I'm not saying everyone should take DMSO. I'm just saying that that's an experience I had.
Mm-hmm.
But there are different ways in which you can decalcify your pineal gland. So most people over the age of 18 so I mean, this is pretty big, is that most people over the age of 18 have a calcified pineal, where a hard shell forms around the gland and our access to the astral realm is effectively shut off. So as we talked a little bit earlier about why people can't see certain things and why other people can, a lot of it may be with what is the state of their pineal gland. And now I'm not saying that all people may be born equally with resonance within the pineal, that maybe some may have more, susceptibility to spiritual matters. But if you're born with a lower level of spiritual awareness and your pineal becomes calcified or damaged, it may be even more difficult to understand spiritual matters. So where Walter Russell in his beginning statements talks about all men want to seek God, I don't know if that's true. I know quite a few men that don't want to seek God, or men and women both, right? And so, I think for him it was very real. For him it was very true that that's what he thought his purpose in life was to seek God and to align with the divine. I don't know if it's true for everyone. And again, I go back to Swedenborg and say it really has to do with their disposition, right? What when they come into this life, what do they come in with? And do they have that desire? Because that's what we're going to talk about next. The next question, desire. So, and according to many esoteric schools, having a calcified pineal gland can result in envy, delusion, pessimism, confusion, jealousy, impaired perceptions of reality, neurological disorders, paranoia, anxiety, depression, and a tendency to overanalyze.
That last one's kind of funny.
Isn't
Okay,
and that's really scientists, right? A
oh
scientist
yeah.
wants to overanalyze it, right? They want to get
Overanalyze. I like that.
right. They really want to just
The
get
specialist to
Yeah.
death.
They can't just like accept what they feel, what their intuition's saying.
Well, because they're lacking, I'm not saying all, but they're, maybe they're lacking the spiritual, right? So they have to overanalyze because they don't have,
Exactly.
yeah.
And so, whether or not it is the pineal gland, this is just what as I'm, looking at this, it's kind of what I'm feeling and sensing intuition. I'm intuitive myself, that I'm kind of become, and it's not the first time, and I'm not the only one that's done this, right? I mean, like the Eye of Ra is actually the, symbolic of this area of the brain. So let us go now. So any questions or any more comments on what I just shared on that?
I'm glad you shared it.
Giselle, do you have anything more to add?
Well, the decalcification, when I talked to my homeopath about, the meditation I'm doing, she says, well, I can, she gave me some stuff to decalcify, you know what I mean, over a period of time. not DMSO, because I don't
Mm.
think she was using that, but whatever, you know.
Mhm. Yes, there's other ways to do it. There's other.
Yeah.
Is that, well, I don't want to interrupt. I'll wait.
Okay.
No, I mean, that's all I'm saying. The decalcification thing, it is well known. And if you ask, you know, a holistic doctor, they will know.
Mhm.
But you have to ask, because it's not for every, you know what I mean? You have to be kind of aware to ask even that question.
Mhm.
Isn't C60 also something? Is that, I thought
Carbon
that was a,
carbon 60.
yeah,
It's a-
I
was
think
that,
carbon 60 is more, I think, for telemeters, the length of your DNA strands at the
oh,
end.
okay, so it's not also helping to decalcify?
It may, but I know that from what I've read, that the main is that it telemeters, I think they're called, where it
Mm-hmm,
help lengthen the DNA strand.
okay.
It could though. I mean, the biggest thing is stop drinking fluorinated water.
Yeah, I have a well, we have a well, so luckily for the last 20 years, it's coming out from the mountain.
Mm,
So I think that's pretty good.
hmm Yeah. So, and there's quite a few ways to decalcify. So question number 2, Walter Russell states the brain is part of the human machine. Can machines know? And from page 56, no, machines can express knowledge electrically, projected projected thoughts, but they cannot have knowledge. So when we get back to our drawing of the brain and kind of what we discussed, if the brain is a machine, electrical machine, and thoughts run through it, within this function, within this system, there is no knowing. So where does the knowing come, right? Well, it'd have to come through some other source, and that could be through the pineal gland.
Well, it's certainly not reflecting, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
when it's doing all these senses,
Mm.
it's doing its function, but
So
Well, you were saying it's like an antenna before,
yes,
right? So
I
that's
don't know.
interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if you have been following what we were talking about in the Telegram, where Ashley was asking about staffs, and Giselle was talking about
Mhm.
sacred points, and we were talking about the augurs and the staffs they carried, which
Mhm.
had coils, which actually picked up a lot of vibration. And we live in a vibratory world, and the light that comes through forces into waves, and the waves then create vibrations and resonances. So we actually sense through resonance. We don't sense through these, from what, again, this is Russell saying this, right? I don't want to jade anybody, but what Russell's saying is that we mistake the electrical impulses that run through our brain through this biology as thought and knowing. And it's an illusion. We're fooling ourselves. But there is a knowing that comes. And so if this electrical impulse is not the knowing, then where is the knowing coming? And I'm saying, well, maybe it's coming from the pineal gland, and maybe that's functioning as an antenna, which is
Well, it's got to come in where I have this astrologer that did a newsletter on that exact part of the brain. I'll have to find it and I'll post it, but something to do with there's something in there that vibrates. That
well,
there's
like you said,
there's something, the tympanus or something, or
the thalamus, which is that center area, is like you said, it's a cave. It's like a chamber, like a vibratory chamber almost.
so the
Oh my
vibration.
gosh,
Yeah.
that's really amazing.
And
Yeah.
as you see, the pineal gland is this against this chamber, right? So, and
Yeah.
again, this is it's nothing new. I'm saying this has been
I know,
a
but
long time.
we have to look at this.
Yeah, but that's why I'm saying, that's why I think the diagrams really help
Sure.
than trying to just
Oh yeah.
So Russell was just talking about no machines. So let's look at a machine, right? Which is the computer.
Here we
might say,
go.
people might say,
Oh, look who just
Jeremy,
popped
you got
in.
right at the right time.
That's so crazy.
You put the computer up and Jeremy comes on.
That's
oh,
so
really?
funny. Yeah.
Yeah, Jeremy's
that
coming
is
in
so
now.
cool. Or maybe
You have to
it's,
let him in.
I don't have that function on anymore. You should be able just to come in.
Oh no, I'm in. I'm in.
Yeah,
See?
like I say, I took that function off.
That's really, really.
you-
It's like the timing couldn't be better.
Well,
Did you time that?
He has no idea what we're
I
talking
don't know
about.
what's going on.
Okay. Well, I was talking earlier that I was going to share a diagram of the computer, and we were really hoping
Oh,
that you'd be here by the
let
time.
me put on my glasses
And I just brought the diagram up, and you popped on.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
right? It was like
Yeah.
that. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Okay. So you got the 4 levels of storage system here. Yeah.
And
Registers, cache, RAM, and higher level storage. Good.
so again, I've been away from building computers for about 20 years, but I still think they pretty much function the same.
Yep.
But we've just been reviewing the brain and its functions and what Russell said about the brain. And the current question is being posed is, Walter Russell states the brain is part of the human machine. And the question is, can machines know? And from page 56, it says, no, machines can express knowledge, electrically projected thoughts, but they cannot have knowledge. So what I was doing here was actually anything in the red that's italics is something I put in, but the diagram itself is from the internet. It's just pretty much a basic drawing. So within this, we talk about the CPU or the register, which I would call the brain, right? It's really the central processing unit. So electrical sensing processor is what I call it, ESP. And then from that, we have the cache with level 1 and level 2, which is actually ideas and thoughts, probably, electrical. And then we have RAM, which could be short-term memories that don't go to the hard drive.
Like that.
Because they're temporary storage, right? So, we have, if we retained all of our thoughts and remembered everything, we would be lost because we would be stuck in the moment pretty much. So we have to let things go so that we can move on. And so we don't record all things into a permanent storage area, which is these storage devices. And so within this hierarchy, we have the ROM or BIOS, which is what's built onto the motherboard and which functions. And that's kind of like your instincts, your autonomic functions, which is like your reflexes, things, your heartbeat. And also could be generational memory that Bruce Lipton talks about with epigenetics, that these are some things that could be stored in our bodies that are there. And then he talks about removable drives, and I'm actually saying that could be like writing or speech, right? Because we can actually put things out there that we know, that we think, and that from our memories we can write them down. We can do art. We can do a lot of other things to get these removable drives, as we'd call them, right? And then we have the network internet storage, which is actually like friends and family. For me,
Nice.
Culture, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like for me, there's a lot of memories I have that aren't mine that I've been told by older cousins or aunts and uncles. Oh, you did, and they become my memories, right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like that's the internet, right? Because we're drawing from outside of ourselves and we're actually creating new memories that we think are our own, but they're not. They could be true, but they're actually seen from a different perspective. And then we have our hard drive, which is our memories, except for traumas. And I'll get into why I'm saying except for traumas later on. But so within this system here of the hierarchical pyramid and this is the way pretty much all computers are made. One thing that Russell says, and even esoterics say, is that there's nothing new under the sun. That anything that's being created is just a reflection of things that are already in nature. So when you look at this, you see the brain, you see the structure is basically the way our brain is set up. And this is just now becoming an electrical impulse of this human brain that we talked about.
The Schumann brain? I'll have to
No.
rewind.
The human brain.
Oh, the human brain. Okay.
Sorry, not the Schumann.
Saying the
I
human
thought it
brain.
was like the
We-
Schumann resonance. Yeah.
Well, there is. I mean, that's what we talked a little bit, but that's
Yeah.
really what maybe the pineal gland is receiving within the hypothalamus.
Right.
That could be, and that's kind of a Freudian slip. But yes, it could be the Schumann. It could be the Schumann brain. That's a great little anagram. But one thing about this is that does not have a system for knowing. Okay, this does not. It's just recording information, recording memories, very similar to the brain. Must be done by an algorithm or operator. So in order for this to really get intelligence, to get any type of knowing, you're going to have to put an overlay, which is what we'd call artificial intelligence, which is really, or machine learning, which would be done through an algorithm, which is really a software program. But even that program, even though they may say it's knowing, it's not really knowing, it's just parsing information into certain parameters that are given to it. And they can say, oh, it's intelligent, oh, it's knowing. No, it's really based upon what the operator wants it to display. And we're saying that it's knowing, but it's not knowing. Any comments on that, Jeremy? Or
It's interesting. So ideas and thoughts. How, I know I've missed a bit, and I read this section probably a couple months back. I haven't been reading along with week by week. So I'm trying to remember a little bit about Walter Russell's concepts of ideas and thoughts. But to map it to the cache, it's a very fleeting. I know this is not like a literal translation. I actually think it's wonderful, though. It's a really great it's a really great interpretation. But more just thinking about like how does he picture ideas and thoughts?
well, and I think that there's two levels of ideas and thoughts, and that's what we talked a little bit about in the previous diagram, as you weren't here. Is that within the brain itself, we have sensations, and from that we can have ideas and thoughts that spring from our sensations. But what Russell's saying is that that is not thinking and knowing. That is a sensation thought. So again, within this realm here, that's why I put electrical here. Okay, this is and this is the electrical sensing processor, right? So anything that's within here is really a sensing process. There are ideas and thoughts, but they don't actually come from the brain.
There may be a little bit more like stimuli responses.
No, they would actually come from source.
These ones,
No, these ones. No, there's nothing in this diagram that comes from source.
Right. So these, like the level, the cache ideas and thoughts would be like stimuli responses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Things that are seen, things that I mean, anything scientific, basically, that we are looking at, that we're feeling, that we're touching, and that we're garnering ideas and thoughts from. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't use our sensing body to actually aid in the knowing from God and the ideas from God. It's really at where does those thoughts and ideas originate from? Are they from a purely materialistic origin, or do they have divine intervention? And I think that's what Russell's talking a lot about, is we get very confused and we think that this electrical sensing, this electrical feeling, this electrical knowledge that we have is what we're intended to do, and that is thinking. And he says, no, that's not thinking. I mean, that's not thinking. That is electrical reaction to sensation.
Related to this, for years, like programmers and coders have been, and writers about this profession have been talking about the eventual computer replacement of our profession, and machine learning is certainly an encroachment into that area. I guess just today or within the last couple of days, Google released a project called Copilot, which basically codes along with you. And as you type, it plumbs its deep learning to, you can even say little phrases or describe what you want to do, and it will drop in bits of code to solve the problem for you. But I think I haven't really had a chance to listen to what the community thinks, but it's kind of an inevitable next step that we all knew was coming.
Well, yeah, and that's, I think, with coders. I mean, 'cause I used to do some coding. They often said that could never be replaced, but it's really the one thing that can be probably replaced the easiest. Once, right now, there's a lot of different standards, right? We've been kind of bouncing around different platforms and so on and so forth. So to really get into a deep learning, you really kind of have to center on a platform and a system that you want to use.
Well, I think of it a little bit like there's original writing, and then there's like, and then you could have something that's like kind of copy
copy paste.
Yeah, but like, or like, in the realm of writing, there's original thoughts that could not just be, well, actually computers do generate original content too, but I don't know if it's actually good.
Exactly.
It can kind of fool you a little bit, but it's weird. It doesn't feel quite right. And then there's a lot of stuff like right now when I write job postings, everything has to get vetted by an AI.
Boy.
It's kind of disheartening.
Wow.
But I don't, but I think this kind of coding thing is kind of like that. I think that there always be original problems that a computer will never be able to solve or do. And then there's a lot of monkey work that the computer probably can fill in, because it's really just aping what, thousands and thousands and thousands of coders have already done, thousands of times. But yeah.
So with it, so I'm because I don't know if everybody actually understands the way the computer is built, and as Russell talks about machines, and some people say, well, a computer's not a machine. If you realize that IBM is International Business Machines, who made the first computers. So the original computers, especially around during Russell's time, the early time, were machines, were calculating machines, and so on and so forth. And so even Steiner talks about machines replacing men, and how much work is being done even during his time by machines. And he was talking more like tractors, and that would take a population of 5 or 6 times what the world was at that time to actually accomplish the same amount of labor. And now for mental capacity, computers have actually far outreached how many people we'd have to do these same functions.
Well, it's interesting because that's a little bit part of the argument of why we need to move to a service economy, right? And that's it's very debatable, but it seems to be like the kind of great reset-y stuff where we all have to move toward servicing each other, and nobody actually ever makes anything anymore original.
And that's what's really happening. I mean, it's very difficult to find anybody that can actually work anymore. And produce anything and be a craftsman. And speaking from someone who makes things and does things, someone still has to make the machine and program the machine, and it's almost like, I don't know if they really realize that at some point it will be just Facebook, and people will all be talking about things they want. But they can't get.
And yet the demand is there, right? Like, because
Yeah,
as you say, it's hard to find people that do that. So obviously, like, there's demand for it. Yeah, it's just maybe it's not built into the education system enough anymore.
And it's, and Elon Musk talked about it also. And it wasn't Musk, it was Peter Thiel talked about this, I think 7 years ago, where he said that there's nothing being manufactured anymore. Why would anyone want to build anything and take all this risk of manufacturing and plants and all this, and what supply lines, when you can go and write 8 lines of code and make the same amount of money on a Facebook or a LinkedIn or some other thing? And so all the money went into software and
It's true.
development and went away. I mean, the things that Peter Thiel talked about was, where's our flying cars? You know, they were in the Jetsons and we still don't got them. You know? We have Facebook, but who really cares? Some people may, but I don't, you know. So we have a lot of these software programs that a lot of people have put a lot of money into and invested a lot of the venture capital in Silicon Valley went into, but no products were really created. And so now we're in an economy that is product less and very heavy in service.
I have a friend who recently did a startup, I mean, over the past few years, and it was a physical device, electronic, but you know, a lot of you know, figuring out how to do manufacturing in China, and it's very challenging. He was advised to go into software for the exact same reasons that you said, and he went down his path anyway, and he's been struggling. It's hard. It's a hard road.
And the thing is that computers don't need products. Only humans do. So an AI may not care if we have any products or not. Okay, let's go to the next question here, which is, what do you think Russell would think about artificial intelligence?
There's no page reference for the answer here.
No, this is, you have to do it on your own.
Well,
really...
when I was reading that question, well, what I read today, I was, you know, there's a lot I was thinking about that, but then I thought about, like, you know, how some people have fake plastic plants. Like, you know, why would you want a fake plastic plant? You know, that's an artificial plant, you know? So I don't know, artificial intelligence, it just, why would you want that? I guess I don't understand it, you know? Yeah.
Anybody else?
I just thought, I mean, the word artificial intelligence, it's only been coined in the last little while, right? And they're selling it like it's like sliced bread or something. But anyway, I'm just saying, they're selling us this idea, but what would Russell think? I don't know enough, but I keep thinking that he wouldn't talk about it that way. But if he did.
I think you know, and this is probably where some of Lau Russell's work probably comes in. I haven't really studied her yet, but understanding that, you know, she brought that kind of, I get the sense that she brought the spiritual, emotional side to his kind of scientific. She brought the right brain to his left, maybe. And thinking back about your memory hierarchy, Will, that we were just looking at, and you know, it's like only artificial intelligence is only half of something there. That's not the whole. I mean, not anything particular on this page, but just kind of how this is, you were acknowledging that knowledge from source is not represented in here, that there's a gap in this, in what the computer has and brings, and what our sense bodies have. They don't have the whole thing, and artificial intelligence is kind of like that. Like, it'll never be able to complete the whole.
It'll never have knowing, right? Like, how can it?
And
can try to fake it.
That's, yeah. It's like, it feels exactly like that it's faking it because yeah.
But what's happening is that the actual conversation's being moved to the electrical sensing is thinking and knowing. And if the conversation moves to think that the electrical sensing body and the brain itself and the electrical current that flows through it is what knowing is, then we will lose all idea of knowing. People no longer understand what knowing is. And that's some of the areas that the IT and what they would call the transhumanism is moving into.
Are you saying they're trying to know or bring the knowing into?
They're
trying to sever us.
They're trying to change the definition of knowing.
Yeah.
They're trying to, if you can change the definition of knowing to sensing, then that now becomes knowing, and there is no knowing. Because no one can know except for the AI.
Are you all familiar with the Turing test? That idea?
Why don't you go ahead and
what's Turing's first name? Anyway, Turing was a mathematician, invented some very foundational theories of computing. Very interesting guy. He did do work in artificial intelligence, early work in that. This is in the, well, gosh, he was involved in the World War II effort in cryptography. I don't know when he did this particular work in AI, but pretty foundational stuff. And he proposed an early test to differentiate, to see whether a computer was smart enough to be considered intelligent. And it was a very difficult problem. How do you evaluate it? And his solution was pretty simple in a way. If you're able to fool a person, like while holding an extended conversation, and so people over the years have entered in competition into Turing tests and participated as the evaluators, where you sit in front of a terminal and you tap, tap, tap away and have a conversation with somebody over the computer and try to see whether there's an actual human operator on the other side or whether it's an AI that's talking to you. And it's and over the years, I believe they've gotten much, much better. They're far more convincing, but I wonder, like, how far can it go? And it just made me think about that, this idea that, if we only have sensing and no knowing, if people lose that capability, well, then it's probably pretty easy to fool to win the Turing test at that point.
And it's kind of like with a movie. You watch a character in a movie and say, "Oh, he has a great life. I wish I lived that way." But it's a movie, right? The parameters have been set, and the roles have been set, and the outcome's been set. It's not real life. And with the Turing test, you're on their battleground. Their battleground is speech. Their battleground is sensation. Their battleground is communicating in that manner. And that's because we're already within this hierarchical pyramid. That is the operation. You're just actually fine-tuning it. So, I would say that the test would have to be me sitting down and asking source a certain question in the computer being put and say, "Okay, computer, answer this question," and not give it any input. And that would be the test. And that's kind of what they do with like remote viewing. Anybody ever watch the movie Men Who Watch Goats?
Oh, I heard about that a long 10 years ago or something.
Yeah,
like
it's on Prime Video right now, and it's basically about the remote.
That's about remote sensing.
The remote viewing program.
Is that right?
And it's free if you have Prime. And it has some good actors. It has the Big Lebowski, and it has quite a few.
It's a fiction. It's not a documentary, right? It's a story.
Not really. If you watch Dr. Lando, he interviewed, I think, and I have one of his books. I forget what his name is, but no, it's supposed to be somewhat of a truthful story.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's about the remote viewing program, and where they sit and they say, "What's in this safety deposit box?" And people can guess what's in there, right? Through actually getting into this knowing and sensing. And if you actually listen to Dr. E's discussion, she says her son can read books with blindfolds on. You know, because again, and this is what I'm trying to get at with where we're going with all this, right? Is that where does knowing come from, and where does sensing, and how we confuse those two things? And it's not me saying this, is Russell saying this, right? That's what Russell's saying. I'm just trying to make it more tangible for us to actually, you know, be able to understand it and see it better. And so within this, the movie, you know, he actually supposedly kills a goat by staring at him, right? But they also do a lot of remote viewing and other things, and so that would be the test, right? Really, take a computer, take a man, and say, okay, what's in the safe deposit box? If the man can do it and the computer can't, then he just doesn't really have knowing. And they weren't using computers to do remote viewing. You know, I mean, so they were using humans. So we may be losing. It's funny that the movie was even on. It didn't do that well, I don't think. But the actors that participated in it, you know, Jeff Bridges was, you know, the great Big Lebowski, and there's just a lot of good actors that were in it, but it didn't have much of a success at the box office because a lot of people probably just thought it's kind of a comedy too. It's not really done as a drama or anything. But if you have a chance, you can watch that. It's rather enlightening. So within that, you know, I think all of us would agree that probably Russell would say that artificial intelligence is not knowing. As he says, I mean, he states that machines cannot know. They can't, and that's what he's saying. So the next question is, what is electrically expressed in the brain and causes all motion? And so what, on page 57, Walter Russell says desire. I don't know any machines that have desire. So if this is true, so desire is not in the brain. It is the centering conscious self. Desire is the cause of all motion. Well, if desire, it electrically expresses in the brain, but desire is not in the brain, how does desire get to the brain?
Well, that vibration that we talked about before you came on, Jeremy, with the brain and what we have in the thalamus. Is that how you say it?
Thalamus, yeah.
Yeah, and yeah.
So desire, and I think, you know, that's one reason I asked you to actually look at Steiner's work, because I think Steiner actually calls it will, you know, the will. And what we call free will, right, is desire. And, you know, going back to Swedenborg also, which talks about the disposition, right? But the life which flows in is received by each one according to his disposition. So we have these comments like desire and will and disposition. And so is this desire, is this disposition, is this will what actually helps us to manifest what it is we see, what it is we think, what it is we feel? Does this desire come from source? It must, right? Because we're not, it's not coming from the brain itself, it's coming from outside us. It's not in the brain, he states that.
And disposition is an interesting word because the word position, you know, so like reminds me of the word angle, you know, which has to do with shape also. So it's interesting. Like, I feel like, yes, that's part of it, what you're saying or asking. You know, desire, you said desire, will, and disposition. Those were the three, right?
For three different people kind of trying to express kind of the same idea.
So it and yes, angle, and Giselle, you were talking earlier about geometry and how, you know, shapes. So it's just interesting to come back to it with the word disposition, which makes me think of angle. Desire seems like something maybe different than disposition, you know. So yeah.
I've thought of will a lot, you know, the certain people that I've worked with who just get shit done. like like and you know, often there is kind of a perceived intelligence, but when you really look at what they do, it's not, I don't always feel like it's the smarts, like the raw, I don't even know what raw smarts is, you know, like these are very kind of muddy words, but I think it's easy to say that, you know, it's kind of lazy to say that somebody is successful because they're smart, right? And the most successful people, okay, and successful is very, I'm talking, it's hard to say this without qualifying everything that I'm saying, but at least the ones who kind of just like charge through and accomplish things, it's like this indomitable will. And I often wonder, like, where does it come from? How do people harness that? Does everyone have it? And they just don't know how to tap into it. I believe that that's what Russell is trying to teach in the
home study course.
But it's really kind of an amazing thing to watch people with that will just go.
It's almost a tenacity, right? That,
yeah,
because to be successful, you have to fail and you have to get up and you have to go again. And if you don't have tenacity and you don't have willpower and you don't have the ability to keep going, then when you fail, you'll just stay down. And we learn more through our failures than we do through our successes sometimes. So the tenacity, the desire, the will to go forward after we fail or after we end up where we don't think we should have, that, I think that does have a lot to do with success. So as we talk about desire, has anyone here felt desire as outside themselves? Because I think oftentimes people think of lust maybe as desire, or, you know, hunger as desire, but these are really just things that feed the body again, right? They just feed the senses. Has anyone really experienced desire for something outside themselves that did not actually do with the senses?
Well, desire is like we have, I don't know, like we decide to do something. It's because we, I don't know, higher aspiration. It's, yeah, you just mentioned about lust and all that, but, or even like with the Buddhists, you know, kill desire or whatever. But I think it's more like towards that will thing that we talked about. So that's what comes to mind. And yeah, yes, like if you decide to have a child, for example, it's a big commitment. And you, well,
Yes.
you do what it comes with it. Like you make a big intention. And but I have to say that had to come from very far. Like it's not just like, okay, I'm gonna have a kid today. It's, as an example, I'm just going to have some example.
I like to think of plants growing. They're just reaching up. That's their desire.
Yeah, because so much of our life, right? Even for me, I would say up until a few years ago, it was totally driven by how much this would make, right? Just like the software. Don't do a physical thing. Because my entire effort, my entire resource, my entire essence was put into fulfilling whatever my needs were, right? And because I thought those were my desires. And for me, what I'm beginning to realize is that I'm not meeting desire, and that's why I don't feel fulfilled. Because once you find out what your desire is, that is outside the sensing body, it's not like a purpose. Okay, it's not like there's some goal. It's actually that it's a desire to do it just for the sake of doing it.
It's in when I was trying to figure out, well, how I could answer the question. I was thinking about, being true to yourself,
Mhm.
but that has to do with me. So that's not outside of myself, but maybe the being true to myself is fulfilling. I don't know.
Authentic, being authentic, eh?
Yeah, and it is desire, but it's maybe authentic desire. Yeah. It reminds me a little bit about what you're saying also about, not doing it for any other reason than, you're being authentic with yourself or true to yourself. Do you?
What?
I hear that's like kind of trying to amplify your own authentic self, your own energetically speaking, your own waveform or something like that, and trying to make it sing and shine. Rather,
Radiate,
yeah,
eh?
project it out rather than tune into somebody else's or some other kind of thing. It's finding your own thing.
And that's really the crux of what I'm talking about, because with Russell, he's talking about that we have to align with source. And that once we align with source, it's kind of like, let thy will, not my will, be done. And once we have thy will be done, once we can actually align with that, we actually have a desire to align with thy will rather than my will. And this is kind of a bifurcation of what it goes on in the world today, and what maybe Russell's saying is that, and I'm not saying that I believe either side, right? I'm not saying that I know that Russell's totally correct that that thy will is what is in I think that we have to align those two. That the alignment of those two, of aligning thy will with my will, is what gives me desire. Because if I was just to do thy will, I would have to desire just to do thy will, and I would lose all sense of myself. And I don't know if that's what the source would want from me, or if the source has made me uniquely to inspire me to put my unique desire and align and work with it. Any comments on what I just said?
When you're connected like that, that's when you can do your best work, and you will attract people, resources, whatever it takes. At the best that we can align to that. And we hope that we can do that a few times in our lives, whatever it is, right? And it's not we're saying that's what we need to do, but whatever we're meant to do at the time that we're given. Like right now, we're meant to do something that it could be just walking around and radiating love, or,
In one of the early group meetings, we were talking about the reason, why are we here, the reason for being. And the thing that I said, it came to me at the moment, is that we're trying to sing together. And we're you know,
I love
like
that.
harmonizing was like a yeah, okay, great, you guys remember that. So I was just thinking of it again here, but maybe in a slightly different context, that instead of all trying to match the same tone, what we're trying to do is project our own tones out there, and then ultimately all of those tones will synthesize into like a harmony. But that's a different way of thinking about singing together rather than all trying to come to the same point.
Which kind of brings us to Swedenborg.
Ah,
Somebody was talking about him recently. I've never heard of him.
Well, Emanuel Swedenborg, and I spoke a little bit about him earlier, is an interesting fellow. He's, much prior to Steiner and Russell, but he was a mining engineer, very successful, and also a politician and so on, and very well respected. But he actually started a church called the New Jerusalem Church, where he took, even though he was Christian based, his whole cosmology was not based on that Christ was the way, the truth, and the light, and that you had to go through Christ to get to heaven. That was not his cosmology. His cosmology was pretty much along Russell's lines, that Christ was enlightened being. And again, this was in 1688, to 17, long before these ideas were popular. But he also, did a huge interpretation of the book of Genesis, a huge interpretation of some of the other. He wanted to do the whole Bible, didn't get all the way through it, but very interesting. Talks about other worlds, other planets.
wow.
Very interesting stuff for a man of his time. But what I see in some of these diagrams, as you see up there by his picture, you see, the third diagram there is, the torus that we talked about and so on. So a lot of the theories that I think came from or through Steiner and through, actually, when I look, I think may have originated with Swedenborg. I mean, they originated sooner too, but I think Swedenborg was a major piece in a lot of what came later in the 1900s. So what Swedenborg's saying, he's actually taken some of the concepts of not Thomas Aquinas, but of some of the Christian fathers, which say the body also aligns these degrees of reality. We have a neutral external body of flesh, a spiritual internal body of spirit, and a celestial angelic body formed of all the heavenly societies working together in harmony. Our spiritual anatomy is not some spectral sprite, but a fully embodied reality that uses corporeal anatomy to transmute subtle tremulations through the strata of our internal cosmos, which means basically vibrations through our tissues. Right? To Swedenborg, the language spoken between the estranged degrees of reality was called correspondences. These sacred allegories served as points of co-correspondence, co-respondence, symbolic metaphors where the literal and the psycho-spiritual respond to one another in kind, and thus their connection to what Swedenborg called the internal sense of Scripture. So when he says Scripture, he doesn't mean just the Bible. He talks about anything that is truth, as we talked about earlier with Russell. Breath itself follows this organization. We have physical breath, spiritual breath, which manifests as living energy, and a collective heavenly breath, which we perceive as truth itself. The spiritual body has every nuance of embodied flesh: biological sex, physiology, and sensory acuity. The spiritual body has a pulse. It breathes and eats and defecates. The spiritual body experiences both pleasure and pain. It has chemistry, gravity, and all the subtle beauty of our natural rhythms and harmonies. The most important difference between these levels is that the spiritual body responds to our psychological and spiritual state, becoming perfect, healthy, and beautiful according to the state of our soul. The soul itself is influenced by societies of spirits with which it conjoins its breathing, and thus becomes connected to the whole angelic system. Describing the heavenly choir, Swedenborg says that although there were a host, they nevertheless all thought and spoke as one. Thus, they all represented as one, and this because no one was desirous to do anything from himself, still less to preside over the rest and lead the choir. For whoever does this is of himself instantly disassociated. But they suffered themselves to be led mutually by each other, thus all individually and collectively by the Lord. All the good who come into the other life are brought into such harmonious agreements. So within this, it's encompassed a lot of the things that we've been discussing.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
There's a lot in there. I mean, my God, I mean, well, I have to look at this paragraph over and over. Like, there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end, when he says the harmonious agreement, it's like, well, I learned that whatever, let's see, whatever best that we do in this world gets stored like in this causal body, and only what's good is allowed to resonate and stay there. So when he talks about they were all one, and whoever does this is of himself instantly dissociated, I'm just saying, it was like, wow, he's kind of describing some of the stuff that came later, like with Blavatsky and other people, you know what I mean?
And that's what I say. When I found Swedenborg, I really thought, that he was actually a precursor to a lot of the theosophical movement. Now, no one really gives him credit, but I find that a lot of, and there's a society for him too now. But again, he's more Christian based, to where Blavatsky, and that's really was where Steiner and Blavatsky kind of had their parting of ways. Blavatsky wanted to go more into the Eastern systems, where Steiner wanted to stay within the Western Christian systems.
But when you think of Dr. Karim, you pointed out that I was listening to his last lecture there for the summer, and he talked about the breath. So right in the middle here, he talks about the breath.
Oh, that's how he would communicate. That's how he actually went into his trances. There's a whole, I'll post it. I have
You
a
mean
link.
Swedenborg? You mean Swedenborg?
Yeah, Swedenborg. Okay. He was the one who actually started with spiritual breath. Okay. And that's how he would do his work. And he talks about I think I was going to actually post it for Ashley, because she was asking me about a lot of the breathwork stuff. But I think I'll post it now after this video, because he talks about his breath work, how he worked it, and what he would feel in his body as he did the breath work, because he actually was kind of like, he did what, John talks about in the book of John, where he goes to the seventh heaven or whatever. And so he spends a lot of time in heaven talking with angels and different people in his writings, and what he discussed and what he saw, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to bring him up because I really do, like I said, I see as a precursor to a lot of the work that we're talking about. And, there's two sides to Russell, right? There's a scientific side, which a lot of people seem more interested in.
It's certainly what drew me in, but I'm
go ahead.
Just that. Yeah, that's where I came in, but I'm recognizing the wholeness of what he and Lau talked about.
And so, there was, I think it was Matthew that asked me earlier, are we going to follow the home study course? And as Jeremy talked about with the home study, and to me, the home study course is more of an initiation. It's an initiation process into kind of Russell's cosmology, to where the secret of light is really just a discussion. There's really no action talked about within the secret of light, and that's what Leah brought to it was that she actually said, here's a plan of action. Here's how to do it. We have a lot of words here. We have a lot of like ideas and concepts, but how do we actually commune with source? How do we know what source is talking to us? How do we begin to experience the things you talk about? Because if we have a dirty pineal gland, if we have bad thought, if we can't think outside the electrical sensing body, we don't have a chance of really getting to know source. So we can't even get to his first stage unless we actually have those things in place. Now, he may have had those things in place. And that's how he communed. And again, if he knew Swedenborg, he might have actually been doing some of the breath work that Swedenborg talks about in order to actually achieve these states. And so for me, that interests me.
The breath.
I've always, again,
well, you've talked about it at the last meeting.
Yeah. Well, again, in my chart, in my astrological chart, I'm an Aries with about 76% fire. And maybe only 3% air. So I don't have any air in my chart. I need air. I need to get air.
Okay.
So that's might be one reason I actually prefer the breath work so much, because I need it. But I do notice that when I do the breath work, that is where I actually begin to actually experience source a lot more.
Nice.
And within Russell's, as we go further into this, we're going to find out, the breath he actually believes there's a breath of the universe, as Swedenborg talks about. And I believe that the moon breathes. I believe that's the kind of the phases that it's going through. It's kind of a breath phase that it goes through. So I believe that there's a lot of this breath of God moving through the earth. There's our physical breath and then there's our spiritual breath. And when we can align our spiritual breaths is when we can begin to get the kind of communication and the harmony he's talking about, in my opinion. And that's why I'm trying to bring this forward to maybe change our thought a bit and look at just not, don't look at Russell within just a vacuum, to actually bring in maybe some other ideas that maybe or he may have holes in the secret of light.
I like the fact that when you look at it, it brings all this other stuff that we've studied. We can relate to it. I can. No, I never saw Walter Russell until AV and the admins that knew, and Dr. Lando keeps talking about it, and then biogeometry, and it goes on and on. But I think it's good when you study this, you can kind of reach out. Well, you have, because you're bringing all this stuff as well, which really helps.
So any comments on Swedenborg or what we just discussed before I move on to the next question?
Unfortunately, I think I'll have to drop off here. I'll use this break. We're doing another handoff with the kids. I got them back again. But hopefully next week. Actually, I think for a while I won't be able to join at 4:30 prompt, but at least I can jump in for a little bit and join you guys.
Well, is it better to go at 5 o'clock with the group that we have here? Is it better for you at 5 o'clock?
Tomorrow's on the East Coast.
That's that's 8 for me, right? I mean, I can do that this summer I'm good for that. Okay. Yes.
How about you?
That would be fine.
Let's do it at 5 o'clock next week.
It's up to you guys. I won't be able to join promptly.
It doesn't matter. At least we get you for a little longer.
And yes, and thank you so much for coming this week. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now so we can maybe talk a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. It's just
no. My daughter's calling me.